All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to What's Possible. This is the longtime signature program of the Hornets Policy and Politics alumni. My name is Devin Lavelle, and I have the privilege of moderating our What's Possible discussion today. I'm a co-founder and former president of the Hornets Policy and Politics alumni and current president-elect of the Sacramento State Alumni Association. I'm also the assistant director of the California Research Bureau, and most importantly, a father of two great boys. And we will start this morning with a welcome from our fantastic university president, President Robert Nelson. We have been lucky to have him showing Sacramento State what's possible the last 8 years and are happy to have him with us today. President Nelson. You are muted, President Nelson.
It has to start that way, right? I have to be the first one that does it. Okay. It is good to see everybody on this webinar and be able to listen to everyone. If you're wondering what happened to my head, one of those little balls that falls from the trees that are spiky spiked me and took me down, and I hit my head pretty hard. But when you're hard-headed in this job, it helps. So I'm fine. I want to welcome everybody. I remember when the very first time that I got together with the Hornets Policy and Public alumni. It was early in my tenure here, and now as I come to the end of it, it seems very fitting, and I remain just as proud as I've ever been about them. I know that we're talking about possible solutions and to public needs, and I'm really proud to have that opportunity to be able to be here and to be able to listen. Specifically, I was asked to tell you about some childhood needs on our campus and what we're doing for the children. I think most of you are familiar with the ASI Children's Center. It has been up and running for many years. It's at maximum capacity. It is run by student government. They do an absolutely great job. It is accredited, and it is full. It fills up with a waiting list very, very quickly every year. And knowing that it was going to be full all the time, we decided that we needed to do another child care center. We bought a building over on Folsom that used to hold the hobby shop and the dance studio over there. We have converted that into a child care center. It is fully accredited. It is a joint effort with ourselves, with SMUD, and with UC Davis. And it's a partnership. If you go by, you'll see that outside there's a play area and the like. It will house 210 students, 210 children. Of those 210 children, we get 70 of them, or approximately 80, and so does UC Davis, and so does SMUD. If there are any additional places that are open, they come to Sac State, and we get first dibs with them. And right now, UC Davis is filled up. SMUD is not, because so many of the people at SMUD are working remotely. And because it started in the middle of the year, we're not filled up yet ourselves. But it starts for toddlers. The toddlers are the least expensive, and then it goes up in price range from there for each group. We're excited for our faculty and staff to be able to have this opportunity. It's something that they petitioned for when I first came, and I'm glad that it's open and that it's available for all faculty. We're really starting to advertise it at this point, and it will be very successful in what we're trying to do. So that's the update. I hope that's what you wanted, Devin, and thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you, President Nelson. Welcome everybody to What's Possible. We've been doing this through the Hornets Policy and Politics alumni for, I think it's about 11 or 12 years now. And we are excited to be back here. Childcare is an issue that I think so many of us parents don't think about it until it's at least 6 months after we should have started thinking about it. We don't realize, no one tells you how much you have to plan ahead and how much it's going to cost and all of that. And on several points through our experience over the years, we've run into challenges keeping our kids in childcare while we've been working during the day, and it comes up over and over again. And so I am hopeful that while we're just about done with it, we'll be done with childcare later at the end of the summer. It will be something that the next round of parents won't have to struggle through nearly so much. And hopefully you all can tell us what's possible with that. Let me briefly introduce our panelists today. We have Eric Guerra, the council member from Sacramento 6th Council District, a double Sac State alumni, former ASI president, HPPA president, and Alumni Association president, and a good friend. And I'm not sure anyone bleeds green and gold any brighter than he does. Erik Saucedo is a policy analyst and researcher at the California Budget and Policy Center, focusing on education systems. He's a former high school teacher, has his master's from the University of Washington, bachelor's from UC Davis, and very importantly, did the teacher prep at Sac State. So stingers up. And then Jackie Barocio is a principal fiscal and policy analyst at the LAO, focusing on childcare, expanded learning, school facilities, and teachers, and has her MPP from the University of Michigan and her VA from UC Berkeley. We had to let somebody who wasn't a Sac State alum on the panel just for diversity's sake, but welcome all, and thank you for being here. And thank you to our Alumni Association, especially Laura Breedlove-McDaniel and Jennifer Barber for all the work they put into making this happen today. So with that, I will jump right in with my first question. As it has become the norm for parents for both genders to work outside the home, third-party childcare rose in salience is a critical part of that economic equation. It seems to only have really been widely recognized as such in the last several years, though, which to me kind of seems ironic because that aligns with the period when the number of single-parent households has actually been in decline, and the number of two-parent households where both are working has also been in decline. How would you explain these shifts? Is it important for childcare to be thought of as an economic policy, not just a social policy, and what might be different if it were more recognized as such? And I don't know. Does anyone want to take this first, or how about Councilman Guerra?
Here I'll jump in here, and I'll be the contrarian that saying that it's been recognized most recently, but I will say maybe it's become much more in the headlines, and partly I think because you have upper middle income folks now, families who have started to feel the same crunch that many working families, lower middle income families have experienced for many years. Anyone who hasn't had that resource. And in fact, I'll go back to when I was student body president, ASI president of Sac State. One thing that you find out when you become president is that you run a child care center. And as soon as I got elected to be the Sac State ASI president, I had parents at the child care center coming and demanding more spaces and more opportunity. And yes, also even the conflict at the time with faculty wanting those spaces in there that students wanted. And so I was very proud at that point to bring up that issue. But even as early as that point, many folks know my history where, because as a farm worker back in the 80s, parents didn't have a place for their kids. So they went to work with them in the fields. So only recently in the pandemic, with the combination of the rise of inflation, the closure of childcare centers, and also just the cost of managing a center. You've seen, I would say, the perfect storm in the childcare crisis that we have today. Being able to cite childcare centers, being able to get the workforce as well, and also just the sheer metrics of the business aspect of being able to have a childcare center. What I will say that we in the city of Sacramento saw that this is not only the important issue that has been affecting youth as they prepare for kinder, and why do we need to make sure that they have that 0 to 5 support, working with First Five and whatnot. But we also saw how detrimental it is for a regional economy when you have an unstable workforce because of the lack of childcare. And the other issue that we also wanted to tackle as a city was addressing not only the gender pay gap, but the racial ethnic pay gap as well, where you see that as a factor because of the lack of childcare. So rather than looking at childcare as something out of parks or youth enrichment, we decided to say, look, we need somebody in the Department of Economic Development that can work with our Workforce and Employment Training Agency and our Head Start programs, and start thinking holistically with our County Office of Ed on how we tackle what is a regional challenge for most cities in regions, is access to childcare. But I will close my talking points here and move it to my colleagues here on the panel by saying there are 3 major issues that we have to address. Number one, the shortage in the workforce that's happened. And because of that, we've put together an apprenticeship program. We use $1.5 million of CARES funding, but that's only for the city of Sacramento to help create a pipeline and increase the pipeline for childcare workers. Number two, the sheer cost of being able to manage a facility, and that's because the funding for slots that that childcare providers receive hasn't kept pace with the cost of inflation of maintaining it. And third, being able to open up a childcare center, some of it from local government, land use decisions, how you can site a place, and then how the strict nature of being able to open a facility has done that. So I'll leave it to those 3 areas: workforce, wages, space, and then just the sheer operation of being able to manage a childcare center. People will be surprised how expensive a little toilet is for a childcare center.
All right, Jackie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can at least say from the state legislature's perspective, childcare is definitely discussed and seen as an economic policy. I think especially in the time during COVID and most recently in budget conversations that are currently happening, how do we support families in coming out of COVID, recovering from COVID? A lot of the conversations are around maintaining childcare services and also expanding childcare services so that we ensure families, but especially low-income households and women in particular, have those equal opportunities to participate in the labor market. I think a lot of studies nationally do show the link between childcare and labor, especially for women, increasing their likelihoods of participating in the labor market significantly. And I think in the state in particular, the focus is looking at families that may struggle in particular with affordability. And that's how our state program is structured, providing subsidized care to low-income families.
Eric? And that's
Yeah,
Eric, to be clear, we have Councilmember Guerra and Erik Saucedo.
Yeah, great to meet you, Eric. Haven't talked to you, but I know who you are. Well, thank you, Devin, for that great introduction. I think both Eric and Jackie touch on a lot of the important issues related to the state of childcare. Eric called it a crisis, which is what I also believe is happening at the current moment. I think it's on your going back to your question around explaining the shift. I think it's pretty difficult to explain the shifts, but thinking about the childcare as an economic issue certainly is a way that I see it framed in many spaces, including the legislature, as Jackie mentioned, both connecting expanding affordable childcare to boosting the labor supply, which I think is important to look at it in that sense. And I guess another aspect to that that I was thinking about when I was listening to the question is thinking about the connection to between childcare and post-secondary education attainment. We know that there's a gap between the number of credentials and degrees that are awarded to what the workforce demands are. And we also know that the student population include many students who are also parents who work with caregiving responsibilities. I think one estimate I saw was that there are around 300,000 student parents. So when we're talking about students and supporting their career goals so that they can expand their economic opportunities, I think childcare is an important component to that. It goes back a lot to the conversation around what the state's needs are in terms of staying competitive in the market, which is certainly an important way to think about the expanding affordable childcare. I think my organization looks at childcare a little bit different. We believe that early care and learning are essential to contributing to children's growth and development. And regardless of any economic returns, we believe that caring and educating children, it's just the right thing to do. So we look at this from the lens of access, as both Eric and Jackie mentioned. And while we don't have, really have the data to measure the need, there are some estimates that help us kind of contribute to the conversation and really think about what the needs are that are out there, especially for low-income families. I think the most recent estimate that we have, which is pre-pandemic, we know that many things have changed. Increase in slots, but also many providers have closed their doors in recent years, especially during the pandemic. In one study that we conducted using census data, we found that, and again, this is pre-pandemic, that only 1 in 9 eligible children were actually enrolled, which means that 8 out of 9 who are eligible were not enrolled in programs. And you see that there's a mismatch between those who are eligible and the available spaces, and which largely reflects the lack of or inadequate federal and state funding. And also, as everyone's aware, the rising cost of living and wages not really keeping up with demands has really affected families' income, which makes it even more difficult to be able to pay for childcare, which is very, very expensive.
Great, thank you. Jackie or Councilmember Guerra, did you want to respond to anything anyone said, or?
Yeah, I think one of the questions about one to highlight something, and those who have been involved in early childhood education know that by the age of 3, 85% of the brain development has already occurred, and then by the age of 5, over 90% of the brain development has occurred. And so there is a huge necessity to help support our young kids from 0 to 5. And then on the point on educational attainment, one of the challenges that we have in increasing the workforce is that given the wages, and then where many of those who are interested in this career don't have the flexibility of just studying full time or and continuing to get their licenses and their care. So it's important that that regions and localities create earn and learn programs, apprenticeship type programs, where for those people who want to go into childcare. And we did a study with the Los Rios Community College Foundation, with the Sacramento Employment Training Agency, and all our regional providers to look at where the scope was. And what you will find, and what was mentioned earlier, is that predominantly it is women of color who are in the profession and also have the biggest challenges to getting their certificates or their site manager licenses, and even maybe moving into owning their own business in childcare. So if there are ways to be able to support the Earn, Learn program, apprenticeship program, as we're going through increasing that workforce, that hits 2 things. It addresses and it creates an incentive for folks to start into this area, as well as being able to increase the level of education, because we also need quality. One thing that was identified in the County Office of Ed for for Sacramento County Office of Ed's Early Child Education study before the pandemic was that, yes, there were maybe families and parents who were maybe stepping in, grandparents and ninas and ninos who were coming in, but yet didn't have also the educational and quality to provide for those kids. While they may be a safe place, it isn't the education that we need. So we need to look at it in a number of points. The last piece I'll point out is that there are ways where localities and cities, the non-traditional providers, can support the after school and before school programming to fill the gaps and needs. And that, I think, is something that I'm very proud that the city's taken on. We even supported the 4th program, the CARES program, the START program here, all have been before and after school programs to be able to say we can have these large centers in-home programs, but the before and after school programs can also be a need that localities can provide a resource to.
Thank you. So you've kind of already done this first part, but can you provide your assessment of the childcare situation overall? What's working well, what's not? And are there any key questions we don't understand or don't really have enough data to understand? Let's start. Jackie's nodding. Let's go with her.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate, definitely workforce issues have come to light. I think especially not only with the recent expansions that we're doing when it comes to transitional kindergarten, but then also more than doubling the number of subsidized slots, subsidized childcare slots in the state over the last 2 years, needing individuals to fill that increase in supply. But then also, as we're coming back from COVID, what we're hearing a lot from providers is just building back up capacity. The UC Berkeley Center for the Study of Childcare Employment, they have a childcare workforce tracker, and what they've been tracking since February 2020, with the start of the pandemic, we've only recovered about 93% of the lost workforce. So we're not yet at 100% pre-pandemic workforce. So that's definitely something the legislature is monitoring. I think especially, like I mentioned too, the current situation, over the last 2 years, we've increased the number of subsidized slots by about 146,000. And again, that's more than doubling capacity. In terms of how many of those slots have been filled, what we're hearing from providers, it's just taking time, not only for those dollars to be released by the State Department of Social Services, but then also once those dollars are released, ramping up their workforce to absorb new children and then enrolling new children. And that in and of itself could take like 3 months. So we're starting to see some gains in those slot expansions, but I think something that a lot of folks may be hearing that was included in the most recent budget is the governor proposing to just pause future childcare slot expansions so that providers have time to catch up and fully fill the 146,000 new slots that we just added over the last 2 years. And then next year, we'll restart those scheduled increases, which in total, we hope to reach 200,000 new slots by year 25-26.
Eric, your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of interesting things. You mentioned TK, universal TK, and while it's it's an important factor, it has had the rollout of it, unfortunately, has been detrimental to the childcare industry, and that just goes into the metrics of how a childcare center functions. The percentages of students per teacher ratio are much higher for a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and 3-year-old than it is for infant care and toddler care. And there's safety reasons for that. But it also means that if childcare centers are losing the 4-year-olds because of TK and 5-year-olds because of TK, then they can no longer afford to have the support to support infant and toddlers, which are more expensive. And that also creates a pipeline issue for the childcare center because they want those toddlers and infants to have families come in through to keep consistency and be able to bring people through their program. But it has made it difficult when you can get when there's that level of competition, and it's more expensive to manage that. So I think this is one of those where, the shoot then aim was a result of the rollout in some of this effort here. And if I do believe that if we're going to be able to provide and keep childcare centers and support for families, that there needs to be an increase in the support for infant and toddler. If not, what you will see is more low-income families, and I would say middle-class families, being unable to compete and have available for the scarce number of infant toddlers, because some childcare centers just said, we're not going to have infant toddler anymore because of it. And what has happened is you'll see that if you are in the extreme low income category or low income category, you can apply for Head Start, which has its own workforce issues. Even Head Start, and I've chaired the board for it. We've been aggressively trying to get more Head Start employees, and we have slots and availability for them. But that's good for low-income families, but it's the middle-class families and lower middle-class families who don't qualify for Head Start who are going to get squeezed out because of the rollout in how this was how TK was executed and how it gets expanded. So I think that there's been a tension in that world that needs to be addressed, because TK provides an opportunity to enter into the classroom setting to get young kids prepared for kinder, but it also has had a crippling effect when we already had a shortage in childcare centers in our state.
And Eric?
I'll just add a little bit to something that hasn't been mentioned yet. I mean, we know that the childcare industry primarily relies on people to provide the care and education, which is exactly how it is also in K-12 education or TK-12 education. So I think solving issues of workforce is very important. One key area I think is the issue of compensation and increased compensation for childcare workers. Jackie cited a figure from the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment, which shows that we haven't recovered most of the jobs that that we had prior to the pandemic. And I think in the same report, they cite that the low wages are primarily driving worker shortages. And they cite that the median wage for a full-time teacher in a childcare center is a little under $40,000. So when you think about the needs and you think about pipelines, when you think about really increasing the supplying workers in that area, you definitely need to think about compensation and increasing compensation. If there are folks who have a bachelor's degree, for example, working in a minimum wage job, especially if you have student loans. And I think there's some data that shows you the number of childcare workers who have student loans. And we know that support for that has gone nowhere at the federal level. So I think thinking of compensation is a very important aspect in terms of really supporting the childcare workforce. But yes, I do agree with Eric that quality is also important. Training and professional development are also key areas that the state needs to invest in. But I think increasing wages is key to really stabilizing that workforce.
Another thing that we've also heard is just the increasing cost pressures that inflation is presenting to providers as well. So again, tied to this broader issue of compensation. In terms of the data that we may not have like perfect data on, a couple of things in the childcare space that we've struggled with is, especially with this workforce issue, hearing about a shortage when it comes to early childhood educators, trying to get an understanding of to what extent is that driven by turnover versus a qualification issue. And I think getting a better understanding of the how those two factors are at play, and if one is a bigger issue than the other, could then further assist our ability to identify policy solutions. Is it a compensation issue, which could go into turnover? Is it an issue of accessing programs so individuals can get those necessary qualifications, may require different intervention? Other issues that we've, or data that we've struggled to find is data that breaks out and distinguishes issues by subsidized and non-subsidized childcare. So we've seen data on childcare deserts. We've seen data on, again, workforce issues. But from the state perspective, we have direct influence over the subsidized programs. And it's difficult to get an understanding of, are workforce issues greater in subsidized programs or providers that participate in the subsidized program? Are they lower? Childcare deserts, where are there areas where it's specifically low-income families may be experiencing more acute access issues? And then that's a space where the state subsidized program can proactively address. So those are just some initial thoughts on the data question.
Yeah, and I'll on the data side, let me, I'm gonna here's some information from Valley Vision. We commissioned a study, as I mentioned earlier, with Valley Vision and the Los Rios Community College Foundation of early childhood education workers. And here are some of the reasons. Well, first we ask one question: have an ECE worker considered changing careers? And in this survey, the respondents responded 53% yes, 47% no, but the majority of our workers have considered leaving their career. Following that, in the Sac County respondents, we asked the second question, which was reasons the ECE worker considered changing careers. 92% of them responded to wages, 41% responded to healthcare and benefits, and 32% responded to career advancement opportunities, and then and 33% responded to retirement benefits. After that, it's all pretty much lumped into the same issues we hear with any career, but it really comes down to number one, wages, then health and healthcare benefits. And so I think that's an important factor that we have to send out. And when we looked at the wages here for this study, the median hourly wage versus the living wage in Sac County, the median hourly wage for a childcare worker was 13.74. For certified teacher was about 16%, but on the entry level part. Whereas the living wage for one adult with one child, and many of these workers also have children as well, that living wage is $37 an hour. So the disparity between what childcare workers are currently making on the average versus what a living wage is very far off. And so those I think issues have added additional pressure, and which is causing the attrition, unfortunately, in this area. And I think when I want to point out, maybe I'll save this for later, but some of the recommendations for the study, clearly wages, health benefits, and then career advancement are factors that we should consider.
So that takes us nicely to my next question. In any policy area, there's an essential interaction between the trade-offs of quality, quantity, and cost. That seems kind of all the more critical given what y'all are saying about the need for paying childcare workers appropriately, but also the need for affordable childcare for parents. So, you know, this is how we were taught in grad school to look at it, and how we usually think about policy questions. But is this the right way to look at it? And are there any effective approaches to get us away from this kind of a zero-sum sort of paradigm? Let's see. Erik Saucedo, you haven't gone first yet. Let's start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think there has been, recently the state has made progress in terms of starting a process to changing how we fund subsidized childcare programs, moving from one system, or actually two systems, into one unified system that would really provide the funding based on the actual cost of providing care, which is in progress. But then I think what's important to think about that is that the state really needs to think about developing solutions that raise ongoing revenues, because that that new system is going to be costly. I think, Jackie, you mentioned one of the hearings I heard you provided an estimate, which is in the tens of billions of dollars to be able to really fully implement that new system. So I think those conversations are that need to happen. I know it's difficult now because of the current situation with our budget, but I think eventually we will need to go back to that question. And in our office, we're thinking about, what options are maybe available for the state to raise those ongoing revenues. And my colleagues have done a lot of work in that area. And one option that they've provided is to scale back or eliminate costly tax breaks that provide benefits to wealthy and profitable corporations. So I think definitely looking into that and thinking about solutions to raise revenues is going to be super important, because as we have talked in this conversation, the needs are very high.
I also think from the state budget perspective, I mean, overall, we are dealing with a fixed bucket of money. But I do think, as we've seen in the most recent years, the legislature has definitely prioritized childcare. And you see that by just looking at over the last 4 years, the amount of funding that has gone to childcare has nearly doubled. We're now like at an over $6 billion subsidized childcare program. A lot of that has to do with the recent significant slot expansions. And I know the legislature, as Eric mentioned, a few years ago, we did require a series of work groups to provide and recommend a new rate model, to not only unify a rate model, so we're operating under a single rate model, but then also take into consideration the longstanding challenges that providers have brought up when it comes to what compensation should look like. I think even though within childcare, there's always been this balance between investments for slot expansions versus investments in slot increases. And I think in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of investments in those slot expansions. And I think we're starting to see these conversations around rate reform start to pick up, and we'll see what comes of that within the budget. But I also think even within the context of childcare, especially around that quality concept, what we're hearing from families, but then also providers, is quality may mean different things to different families. I think for me, for example, my mom, being an immigrant, Spanish speaking, there may be fears around dropping off your kid at a center. And maybe there's a bit more comfort in utilizing a family-based home, or a grandma or an aunt or a cousin. So I think it's also trying to look at what quality means to each family, what are their individual preferences, and ensuring that our system supports that. But then also ensuring that, again, we're providing access to all forms of childcare for families.
Councilmember Guerra?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things, from the local perspective, what can cities and counties do? Number one, for those child care center, businesses on that side, is increasing the ability for siting, looking at reducing any unnecessary requirements. If you have to apply for a conditional use permit process and go through a planning commission hearing and take all that time, then it's highly unlikely that you may be able to get your center up and going, or even an income home center. So in the city of Sacramento, we've eliminated those, created an objective process where we work with, where it can be more of an administrative process. I think making sure that when you're looking at accelerating pathways for learning and work-based learning, and I bring this up because my mother, who had worked in the fields until she was 50, When I was going to school at Sac State, she got her GED there and then went to the Los Rios for her AA degree. I think we should look at every alternative pathway to be able to enter into education. But it is through those earn and learn programs if we're going to address that shortage and figuring how do we support those. While we address wages, the also benefit of childcare for some of them, I know for my mother was she enjoyed working with children, but she also didn't want to spend 12 hours a day in the sun anymore as she got older. It was a transition out of into a different career. I think there are ways we can also work with our educational institutions to outreach and look at career pathways. For her, it was a career pathway, and making sure that we don't lose sight that early childhood education is not just for the youth, but for the providers, and in addressing that. The other piece, again, when I talk to childcare providers in my role as whether it's at the Employment Training Agency, in our county city task force that we've created, is reimbursement reform. And how do we make it easier in the current system where, yes, there is a finite amount of money, but if we can help childcare centers with their cash flow challenges by improving the reimbursement process, then we help them stay afloat as well. And then finally, if there are ways for the state or counties to look at the cost of search and recruitment, many childcare centers themselves are spending a lot of money monthly just to pay a service to look for people and getting very few little responses. And that's money lost that can't be put into the system here. And we've looked at how do we support those family-based childcare providers? How do we provide educational attainment to the grandmas, the ninos, the ninas, the abuelas, to be able to support them? Because at the end of the day, we're looking at every possible option for whether it's an in-home provider, a family member, a center to be able to do that. We have to look at all those pieces. I will say that I do have to thank our Sac County folks, because even as we hit the pandemic, we fared a lot better than the other places in the state. And according to the study, because we took advantage of how do we provide stipends to childcare centers to bridge their challenges as not only we entered the pandemic, but coming out of it, and then also created startup stipends so that we didn't, as some people exited the industry, we had new people start up as well. So I think there are a few ways we can address those challenges.
So are there any locations or specific situations that are addressing these issues particularly well? Jackie.
I think in terms of situations, as COVID-19 temporary policies are ramping down, I think the legislature is trying to be thoughtful of which of those actually had beneficial impacts to families and maybe merit continuing on a permanent basis. I think the key policy right now that's being discussed is waiving family fees within the subsidized childcare program. Many families that entered the program during COVID-19 weren't required to pay anything because we did temporarily waive them. However, they're scheduled to go back online July of this year. And what we're hearing from families is that that really could be a make it or break it for them to even continue being enrolled in the childcare program. And the expense of that being they would have to find informal childcare, and that could be and that could mean them reducing their hours, going part-time or not working at all. So I know the legislature is proactively trying to figure out what are options that we have in this space. I think what's difficult is that the federal government does require that the state have some form of a family fee structure. However, what that family fee structure looks like is completely dependent on the state. Last year, there was legislation that tried to reduce the number of families that would be required to pay family fees, but then also reduce that family fee to 1% of their income. Unfortunately, that bill was vetoed by the governor, but members are trying to get that bill through again this year. So we'll see how that goes. But I would flag the family fee as being a situation, a policy situation that did come out of COVID that seemed to be beneficial, and that we're proactively trying to think of ways to maintain it.
Thanks. Erik Saucedo.
Thank you. I definitely agree with Jackie in terms of the situation with waiving family fees. We think is a very important area for the state to continue to invest in. What Jackie mentioned, those expire pretty soon. In terms of other, but sorry, let me go back to that. So even though it's important to waive those family fees, we think that having to charge family fees, I think that's also an important question to ask. Why do we charge family fees? I think that also reflects a symptom of the low rates that providers get from the state, where they're forced to now charge family fees because they're unable to cover the cost of providing care. So that's how we see it. And other areas, I think that Jackie also mentioned in terms of like hold harmless provisions for providers. I think we may have different opinions on those, but I think those have been essential for providers to stay afloat. For example, being funded based on enrollment rather than attendance has been really beneficial for providers in trying to address some of the needs, especially financial needs, when children aren't able to show up to the childcare center. So I think that's an important area to also consider. And I think the ECE coalition has a specific tax related to that in terms of really raising rates this year to ensure that providers don't need to charge fees, and also to continue to expand those provisions for providers. So I think those are important asks that the legislature should consider this year in order to stabilize the system this year, but also think of longer term in terms of like I mentioned earlier, in terms of the rate reform, thinking longer term, how do we plan for that in future years? I think those are also important questions that the state is considering, but that need to be really addressed both in the short term and in the longer term.
Thanks. Before I throw it to Councilmember Guerra, I should add that, or say that anybody in the audience who might have any questions they'd like to throw up to put in there, if you want to put that in the Q&A function, this would be a great time to think about that. And Councilmember Guerra, and also if you had any more takeaways from the survey you wanted to mention, this would be a great time for that as well.
Yes, I definitely will support rate reform as a huge one, because again, the fee is a product of the gap financing that needs to occur for a center to operate, and not only that, for them to grow. I mean, if you can't realistically provide your employees any sense of confidence that their salary will grow with inflation, then we're going to see attrition continuing to happen. The second piece is, localities, don't plan for this as part of their needs. If you think about master planning, we plan our housing demand, our water demand, our road demand, all a part of a city or county's general plan to look at that. But rarely has it ever been a conversation about, well, what about the demand for childcare? Well, as a necessity for a region to operate. And so one of the things we have included in this process of our general plan for the city of Sacramento, and we're really advocating that other cities do that, because childcare is a regional issue. If families will take their kid close to home or close to their work, and since many people move between jurisdictions, these have to be regional decisions about the shortage in childcare. So I think Council of Governments should be looking at how childcare is a product of their ability to move and have a fluid workforce and an available workforce. And then on the requirements for multifamily housing and construction, one of the factors in building, any kind of multifamily housing is you have to consider what amenities the tenants may have and need. Sometimes they think about pools or open space, but rarely do they say, should we be building a space for childcare centers that will inevitably pay a lease space to that property? The interesting thing, we applied for some funding to create an affordable housing development project on Stockton Boulevard, an infill project. And because we wanted to put in a childcare center in it, it actually made the application to the state less competitive because it would increase the cost for when applying for tax credits. So if we really want to address the issues of low-income families and addressing the biggest challenges that they face, then we should be looking at how we address those point systems. When you're applying for a tax credits for affordable housing place, it should be a positive that you're willing to build a place where they don't have to drive to drop off their kids. If you think about the morning routine, you have to figure out where you're going to drop off your kids, where you're going to get your coffee, and sometimes where your cleaners at. And I call it the 3 C's, childcare, coffee, and cleaners. But if you have to drive around all over the place for those, then that's going to be a loss of time to the family, but bigger issue cost. So all joking aside, I think the state and localities have to think about how their policies affect childcare. The last one I'll say is even parking. You think about the drop-off zone. How many parents did I meet, before we changed our parking ordinances and loading ordinances, where you have to, the loading zones are, twice a day, but you go out and then you get fined. You get a $50 ticket for parking in a loading zone, where most localities require you to stay in the vehicle when you pick somebody up. Well, no one's going to have their toddler run out. And what we found out is those same issues affect places like senior centers. So there are things that we need to think about in our policy about how families interact and how things actually function in our community, such as zoning and planning and long-range planning, along with what we desperately need right now is greater financing for childcare providers.
Thank you. All right. So, what do you wish policymakers better understood about childcare, and what do you wish the general public better understood? And we've got just about 2 minutes left in our slotted time, so a little bit of a lightning round, and let's go with Councilmember Guerra first.
I'll say that I'll leave Eric and Jackie to talk about policymakers, but I'll say what I wish the general public understood is just how complex it really and how difficult it is for the providers, and also how difficult right now it is for the workers. The workers love their work. Many of them are considering leaving because they just can't pay for rent themselves. They can't pay for food themselves. But I just think that a little sympathy also for someone, and recognizing also, this person is managing your most valuable asset, which is your kids. So take a little kindness with your workers, and I would say that the general public is that it's everyone's looking at it now, but it is much more complex than just one entity trying to resolve this problem.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Policymakers, definitely strengthening the workforce is key. Also that we need better data. And then I guess for both families or the general public and policymakers as well, I think that in a state as rich as California, we can have an early care and learning system that truly works for families and provides those learning opportunities for children. I'm thinking about, what Jackie mentioned, for example, our definition of quality for parents. So really having options and being able to utilize those options that work for you, for your work schedule, is very important. So I think we should work towards that and really demand that.
Thanks. And Jackie.
One question that the legislature right now is working to better understand through the budget process is, we made all these significant investments in slot expansions. Why is it taking so long to fill them? And I think as we're hearing from departments that are releasing these dollars and providers themselves, just based off of this, even this conversation alone, it's, yes, we have billions of dollars to give out, but it takes time for childcare centers to start, especially new childcare centers to come online. So that's what we've been hearing is a significant portion of why it's taking so long. It's just even current providers applying for licensing to expand the number of kids that they could serve. That requires licensing to do walkthroughs, but also local government. Maybe they're building a new, maybe they want to build out their facility. So they're applying for facility grants. And then once they get that grant and they're due construction, fire marshals need to come and review the building. So we've just been hearing it, big changes just take time. I think having that perspective is helpful.
Thank you. And I just wanted to acknowledge one comment we got in the chat from William, pointing out that we're talking all this about childcare, and another way of looking at it would be to put some of those same resources to allowing parents to better afford to stay home with their kids, which is, I think, a point well taken. And if anybody has any very brief thoughts they want to give on that, you're welcome to, or going once, going twice, or otherwise, I will say thank you so much for your time. This has been a fantastic discussion. I think we understand a little bit better what's possible with childcare here in California. And I forgot to mention earlier, but this has been recorded and will be shared out at some point in the not too distant future. So if you have any friends or colleagues who might be interested in the discussion but weren't available today, please feel very free and encouraged to share. And with that, thank you all so much. And if the president doesn't mind, I will say Sac State is #1. Stingers up. Bye, guys. Thank you.